Right, part two, back in the museum after a cup of coffee and a sit down and a Twix with the boys. Just want to come back to a couple of bits I missed because I'm an idiot. So we've been looking at the Sturm Schultz 3, and the thing I forgot to tell you was that the hull, all the running gear, are from Panzer 3. So it's basically the tank that we saw earlier. I won't bother walking back to it. And they've dropped on this tank destroyer configuration. So we see this a lot of the German vehicles where they use existing stock and they upgrade it. So again, if we had a look at the Sturmpanzer 4, the Brummbach, this again has got the running gear, and the whole bottom half of the tank is the Panzer 4 that we saw earlier as well. And we take that all the way over to the Hummel that we took a look at. So what we see is the German army constantly updating, reusing bits and pieces and building on it. Right, so now I've got that stupidity out of the way. Right, here we go, look at this. I'll just take a step back because it's so big, this beast. So here we go, this is the Sturm Tiger. This is part of the Tiger family. Again, this was something that the Germans built on. So what you've got is you've got the standard Tiger 1, bottom of the tank. They've taken the turret off and they've dumped this massive substructure on top. And this is kind of the ultimate assault gun. There weren't too many of these about, and they were mainly used on the Eastern Front. I think this is the only one in Western Europe. The other ones at the Russian Tank Museum. There was a big display down at Bovington over the last few years of all the Tiger family, and this was the only tank that they didn't have. So they had like a virtual reality version of this. Again, talking to Henry, the nice curator fella here, he was explaining that Bovington wanted to borrow this for their display, but this tank is actually lent to the German Tank Museum by a city of, I think it's Koblensk or something like that. So it's not actually owned by the German Panzer Museum, so it's not theirs to lend. Anyway, that aside, let's take a look at this. So what we got here is this massive gun. And the munitions. So this is a 38 centimetre round. What's not immediately apparent is it's actually a rocket. It's not actually just a big shell, it's a rocket, and it's fired like a rocket. So the actual cannon itself was a shipborne piece of artillery. So they had it off the Navy, played around with it a bit, and they put in this huge rocket. So these things are 40 kilos each, as you can see. There's quite a good little set of pictures at the bottom here. So at the back of the tank, it came with its own crane for loading the ammunition. The ammunition would then sit on a sled to be loaded into the main gun. And these things are huge. It only carried 14 rounds, mind you. And then you can see when it's actually fired, it fires like a rocket rather than like a conventional shell. And I think this had a range of something like 6 kilometres. So it would just lob one of those up and smash to bits whatever it landed on. I think they're saying these were used in Warsaw. There was a little note on here I was looking at. Yeah, suppression of Warsaw in 1944. Crushing the uprising, which is terrifying and bloody awful. But yeah, it's a classic Tiger variant, and I'm very, very happy to see it. And yeah, touch the thing. Wonderful. Right, now we're going to go right to the very top of the tree for German tank evolution. And here we've got the King Tiger, the Royal Tiger, go by any of the beast's name. So here it is, the big beauty. We've seen a couple of these. Obviously there's one at Bobby, there's one at Samoa, and this is the Panzer Museum's own. We've looked at it, we talked about it before, so I'm not going to labour anything about it. It's just nice to see one. So it's got an 88mm gun, massive stopping power, massively armoured. But again, we see this kind of recurring problem. It's too bloody big. It can't bridge well. It's too slow to be used for kind of breakthroughs. And by the time it does get into service, we see this in Normandy. It's really been used to plug gaps rather than be the assault force it wants to be. By the time we're in Normandy, there's very few spares. They break down. You've got the complexity of stuff like the road wheels. If you've got a problem with one road wheel, you've got to have a whole bunch of road wheels off. So these things broke down left, right and centre. But they were obviously considered to be the top of the tree. But interestingly as well, tank developments on the Allied side are kind of surpassed this. So there are accounts of sort of T-34s taking these out in numbers. So even though it was the biggest beast on the pitch, it was still vulnerable, and it just kind of it was a wasted time to a degree. There's the argument that the Germans should have been punting out loads and loads of Panthers rather than knocking out these Super Tigers and bits and pieces. But there you go. Right, moving on. Got the last of the World War II German exhibits. I'm going to do some Allied stuff in a minute. So this is an SDK 234-4. So what's different about this? So we looked at the SDK 251 earlier and its variants. So this 254, we'll see, is a wheeled vehicle rather than a track vehicle. 4 whopping great big road wheels on each side. Fantastic for cross country and off-roading. And again, this was a kind of a platform for a number of different variants. This one, let me just get left the camera up, has got an anti-tank weapon in it. It's one of the packs. Yeah, pack 40 again, that we've seen earlier. So it's got an anti-tank gun in it. It's not really meant to go head to head with armour. This would be something that's basically a scout car, really. But they've slapped an anti-tank gun on it for a bit of a laugh, I'd imagine. Reading, and I didn't realise this, had 2 drivers. One for going forward and one for reversing. So in the tradition of the best scout cars, it can get itself out of trouble as quickly as it's got in it. But a really interesting piece of kit. Little kettle wagon. If you've seen Save It Private Ryan, you want to have it? Lovely little thing. Right, we're going to go on to some of the Allied stuff now. There's not many of them. There's only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we'll start off with something Russian. So this is the Su-100. So this is a T-34 chassis, as we can see, and we'll have a look at T-34-85 in a minute, that's been turned into a tank destroyer. So the gun, Su-100, has got a 100mm gun on it. So this is the Russians being a bit clever and just upgrading some of their existing kit. That's a whopping great big gun on it. You can see we've got that nice kind of slopey armour thing that they developed. We often see on the T-34s this kind of stuff. So these are handholds. See them on the back? For your infantry, your tank riders. And this is quite nice as well. This is a whopping great big saw. Obviously there's loads of trees and bogs and stuff. So they had these kind of tools for cutting logs in half, for folding and that kind of other bridging bits and pieces. So that's a nice Russian tank destroyer now into Sherman territory. So this is a Sherman. This is an M4A1 hull, and that's it's a later Sherman turret they've dumped on top. That's called an Easy 8 configuration, and that, if I remember, is a 76mm gun rather than the normal Sherman 75mm. You'll see with the Shermans that this whole configuration, the M4A1, was kind of an American configuration. We use a later version, which is much more squarey, and a lot of our stuff would have plates welded on the side to protect the magazines, basically, and other vulnerabilities that we knew would cause us big trouble if we took a shell. But the Easy 8 turret's really nice. Well, that's 76mm gun on it. So that's your Sherman. Coming on now, this is a Comet. So I think I've probably spoken about Harold Hamilton Taylor, Spud, who I was privileged to meet at the Tank Museum some years ago. Spud was a gunner on one of these, and it was in one of these that he took out a tiger. So well done, Spud. This is a lovely version. It's really nice condition. I haven't seen this particular tank before, but this was the heaviest piece of British armour by the end of the war. It literally just came right towards the very end, so we couldn't really do an awful lot with it. Very limited combat deployments. But this was it. This was the best of the best. This is everything we had. So much so that these actually went on to serve with us in Korea. So I'm told. I'll have to explore that a bit. That's quite interesting. So that's your Comet. And now another development. This is the M10, the Achilles tank destroyer. So the Americans had a tank, the M10 Wolverine, which was their tank destroyer, and we developed the Achilles. So what we did was we took their gun out because we didn't like it, and we slapped in what we got on the Comet. So the Comet, I should have mentioned, has got a 17-pounder sitting up in that turret. And why is that gun so important? Well, that's the anti-tank gun that we also mounted in our version of the Sherman, our own tank destroyer, that we called the Firefly. But that's another story. So coming back to the Achilles, so the Achilles is a tank destroyer, a similar kind of doctrine to how the Germans would use them. You want to be ambushing in this, and you want to be ambushing in numbers. You don't want to be going toe to toe with Panzer IVs or anything, because although it's armoured, it's not a traditional kind of fighting tank. Variation for us for the Achilles was that we won't see it here. That's an open top, so you can get in, you can see into the crew compartment from above, and to kind of offset the fact that we've smashed we've put a great big 17 pounder in it. We needed to lose some weight, so what they did was they took the top of the turret off to reduce some of the weight. Now, if you're fighting on a linear plane, you're okay with that. But obviously, if anybody's using any airburst munitions, like those self-propelled German guns we looked at earlier, your crew's going to be dreadfully vulnerable to attack. So we're wrapping up the Second World War part of the museum, which is stunning, I have to say, absolutely stunning. There's just one more. I'm going to go into the kind of the post-war gallery now. I'm just going to look at one tank here. I'm going to come back to our lovely T-34. So this is a latter version of the T-34, but this is the T-34-85, so called, because it's now been upgraded from the 76mm gun to the 85mm. But this tank basically didn't change so much for years and years after the war, and it was used by most of kind of the Soviet bloc. But if we just think of this from a World War II perspective, we see all the similarities with the Su-100. This is a big clanking monster. I was lucky enough to have a go in getting in the turret of one of these earlier in the year, and to say it's basic and sparse is an understatement. I think I've mentioned this before. We see the same tools that we saw earlier on the Su-100. We see the same rails that the tank riders would hold on to. Oh look, she's open as well. See how basic she is inside. It smells lovely though. So this was the latter version of the T-34. And now I'll just take you back to the Su-100. I think I mentioned this previously, but it just goes to show you how kind of basic this Russian stuff was. Not because they were stupid, just because they wanted to manufacture as much as they could, get it out on the field. And if they lost it, they'd have hundreds to replace it. This was something Spud showed me at Bovington years ago on their T-34. So on the tracks, you see the tracks here are busted. Each link is joined with a track pin. These things. And if I show you that, on a Panzer III chassis. This is nice. So that's locked in. That's a lock bolt. It goes all the way through to the other side. So that bolt won't come out. They're all fixed in. But obviously there's a maintenance implication for locking all of those track links together. So the Russians, doing it on the cheap in a hurry and en masse, they're not going to bother with that. So they don't have that. Their track pins are just a bolt, and that bolt feeds in from the whole side of the tank all the way through the track and isn't sealed at the other side. So what happens is, as the tracks rotate, these things become slightly loose and begin to come out. So all they did was stick a whopping great big V-shaped bit of metal at the back of the tank, so that every time the tracks rotate, the track pins come loose, and as they come up the back they strike that plate. You see all the strike marks on it, and it smashes them back into place. So really incredibly easy, cheap, nasty fix, but it worked. But the noise these things made, I've seen one running, is terrible. So to actually been inside it must have been awful. Anyway, that takes us to the end of the World War II galleries of the German Tank Museum, and I have to say this is a fantastic place. Everything is really well cared for. The staff are really interested and interesting. The pieces they've got here are quite unique, as you can see. I mean, Bobby would tear your arm off to get hold of one of these. And the fact that you can touch this stuff, you're really up close and personal with it, like Bovington really, where you can just touch a bit of living history. It's fantastic. I've not bothered with all the guns and all that gubbins because I'm not really all that concerned about it. But I hope you found this useful, and I'll take a look at the modern gallery next. Cheers.